There was this headline recently, really made some waves, you know.
Oh, yeah. Which one?
The U.S. government taking a big stake in Intel, like a really significant equity stake.
Ah, right. That one, yeah, caused quite a stir.
Definitely. It was about, what, roughly 10%? Happened late August 2025.
And the price tag was pretty substantial too, wasn't it?
Yeah, $8.9 billion. A hefty sum.
Wow. So where did they find that kind of cash?
Well, it wasn't just pulled out of thin air.
Yeah.
About $5.7 billion, that came from existing GPS Act grants.
Okay, the CPS Act funding makes sense. That's the big push for domestic semiconductor manufacturing.
Exactly. Money already allocated, just not paid out yet. And the rest, the other $3.2 billion.
Where did that come from?
Something called the Secure Enclave program, more focused on, like, defense and national security chip supply.
Right, ensuring critical systems have the chips they need. Okay.
So combine those, and it gives Intel roughly $10 billion. The idea is for them to seriously ramp up U.S. manufacturing and R&D.
Got it. A big injection of capital for domestic expansion.
But the immediate reaction, well, it was pretty much what you'd expect, honestly.
Let me guess, not exactly cheers all around.
Not really, no. Most tech analysts, commentators, even some investors, they were pretty critical.
Saying it was a bad move for Intel as a business.
Yeah, basically. Interfering with the market, burdening the company, you know, the drill.
Yeah.
On the surface, it does look kind of controversial. Okay, let's unpack this.
What's fascinating here, though, is that everyone sort of jumped on the criticism, the immediate business impact. But there's another way to look at it, a less discussed angle, maybe more strategic.
You think there's a positive case here?
I think there's definitely a case to be made that this could be a really smart move, not just for Intel in the long run, but for the whole country.
Okay, so the mission today is to explore that, to challenge this sort of knee-jerk reaction.
Exactly. Why this thing that looks maybe bad on paper could actually be a strategic win. It gets into national interest versus, short-term market feelings.
All right, where do we start to build that case?
We have to look at the big picture first. The global chips situation.
Meaning TSMC.
Meaning TSMC. Right now, they are the undisputed leader.
Yeah.
If you want the most advanced chips, the ones powering everything,
Your phone, AI, military tech.
all of it, you're almost certainly going to TSMC in Taiwan. They make a huge percentage of the world's advanced chips. Some say up to 90% for the really cutting-edge stuff.
90%, wow.
Yeah, and that dominance, that's where the vulnerability comes in for the U.S.?
Because TSMC is in Taiwan.
Precisely. A place China considers its own territory. It's, let's just say, a geopolitically uncertain region.
Understatement of the year.
Right. So imagine, just think about the possibility. What if China attacks? Or blockades Taiwan?
The chip supply just stops.
It would be catastrophic for the U.S. It wouldn't just hinder things. It would pretty much cripple our ability to get the chips we need for the economy, defense, everything.
Okay, so that paints a pretty stark picture. The conclusion is unavoidable, really.
What's that?
The U.S. needs its own reliable domestic chip manufacturing. We can't be this dependent.
Absolutely. It's a national security imperative, not just about business competition.
So if we need domestic manufacturing, why not just build a new company? A U.S. version of TSMC.
Well, that's the thing. It's practically impossible. It sounds simple, but it's really, really not.
Why? Just the cost.
The cost is astronomical, yes.
Yeah.
Billions upon billions. You need these giant factories, fabs, costing maybe $20 billion each?
$20 billion for one factory.
Easily. And they're filled with unbelievably complex machines like those EUV lithography machines from ASML. They cost over $150 million each.
Okay, so the money is insane. But is it just money?
Not at all. That's maybe the easy part. You need decades of know-how, highly specialized engineers, super complex processes that have been refined over years and years.
Right, the institutional knowledge.
Exactly. And the supply chain. It's incredibly intricate. It took half a century to build up. You just can't create that overnight, no matter how much money you throw at it.
So starting from scratch is basically off the table.
Pretty much, yeah.
Which brings us back to Intel.
Right. If you need an established domestic player, someone with the infrastructure, the talent, the history.
Intel is really the only game in town in the U.S. Despite their recent struggles, maybe?
Despite any challenges, yeah. They're the U.S.'s best, probably only a viable option for this kind of advanced, large-scale domestic manufacturing.
But Intel has its own problems, doesn't it? Especially with getting other companies to use its factories, its foundry business.
That's the core issue for their foundry ambitions, yes. Demand isn't really there yet.
The big designers, like NVIDIA, Apple,
Yeah.
they still mostly go to TSMC, right?
Overwhelmingly. TSMC has the proven track record, the leading-edge process tech consistently, the long relationships. It's hard for Intel to break in there.
So Intel needs customers, but the customers aren't coming in droves yet.
Which leads to this.
Yeah.
You could call it the commitment conundrum.
Okay. What's
So it's a chicken and egg situation. Intel needs big, long-term orders to justify the massive investment needed to make its foundry world-class and keep it that way.
Billions in investment, needing billions in orders.
Exactly. But no major customer, like an NVIDIA, is going to commit those huge critical orders if they're worried Intel might not stick with the foundry business long-term.
If they think Intel might, I don't know, pull the plug if it gets too hard or expensive.
Precisely. These companies need absolute certainty their chip supply is secure for years. They need to know Intel is all in and will keep investing to stay competitive. Without that confidence, they'll stick with the safe bet, TSMC.
And that creates a tough spot for Intel internally, I imagine.
A very real dilemma, because purely from a business perspective, maximizing profit for shareholders,
Yeah.
you could argue the logical thing for Intel might be to just give up on manufacturing, focus only on designing chips.
Which is higher margin, less capital intensive.
Generally, yes. So if you're only looking at the next few quarters' results, maybe scaling back the foundry looks rational.
Well, and here's the national interest angle again.
Exactly. That move, while maybe good for Intel's stock price in the short term, would be terrible for the USA.
Because we'd be right back to relying on TSMC and Samsung.
Completely. Relying on companies whose main operations are overseas and areas close to China with all the geopolitical risk that entails.
So that's a non-starter from a national security perspective?
You really can't afford it, which raises that big question. Can the U.S. let its critical chip supply depend on potentially unstable regions? The strategic answer has to be no.
Okay. This is where the government buying that 10% stake comes back in, right? It directly addresses this commitment conundrum.
Yes. That's the crucial link. It's not just about the money, the $8.9 or $10 billion. That's helpful, sure. But the real cleverness, here's where it gets really interesting.
Go on.
The equity stake itself. The U.S. government literally owning a piece of Intel. What does that signal?
That they're invested, literally.
Exactly. It acts as an implicit promise, a very loud, very public signal that Intel Foundry is strategically important and isn't going anywhere.
It's not just a grant they could pull later. They're owners now.
Right. They have skin in the game. Their interests are now aligned with the long-term success of Intel's manufacturing. It tells the world, tells potential customers, this is critical to the U.S., we are backing this.
It basically de-risks the commitment question for companies like NVIDIA or Apple.
That's the core argument. It gives them the confidence they need to actually consider Intel seriously for manufacturing their advanced chips.
Because they have an assurance, backed by the government, that Intel will be there, investing, competing for the long haul.
Yes. It tackles the biggest barrier for Intel's foundry, that uncertainty. It could be the key to finally unlocking that external demand Intel needs.
Okay, that makes sense. It reframes the government stake completely.
It does.
So let's go back to the initial criticism. People saying this is bad for Intel's business, government meddling, etc.
Mm-hmm.
How does this view square with that? Is this actually good for Intel's business in the end?
Well, that's the counterargument. If you look long-term, beyond the next quarter, yes, this strategic investment could be very good news for Intel investors, too.
Hi, so?
Ben Thompson, from Stratechery, he had a really sharp take on this.
Yeah. What did he say?
He basically argued that Intel prioritizing these government interests, which are all about national security, long-term U.S. chip making, over maybe what seems like immediate shareholder duty, isn't necessarily bad. You could easily frame it as Intel finally valuing the long term over the short term.
Thinking strategically instead of just quarter to quarter.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And Thompson made this killer point, kind of an aha moment.
Okay.
He said, look, if Intel had actually done that for the last 20 years...
Meaning prioritize long-term manufacturing and maybe national needs.
Yeah, if they focused strategically on their foundry for others, maybe they wouldn't be in this position where the government felt it needed to step in like this.
Wow. Okay. So the government intervention isn't the problem. It's maybe a symptom of Intel not thinking long-term enough previously.
That's one way to read it, and a powerful one. It reframes this whole thing. It's not a burden. It's a necessary course correction, pushing Intel towards long-term relevance and stability.
A future where Intel serves both shareholders and the national interest.
Exactly. It aligns those two things.
So what does this all mean, wrapping it up? It sounds like a win-win, potentially.
That's the argument. You address a critical national security needs secure domestic chips, less reliance on risky regions. That's a huge win for the U.S.
And for Intel.
Intel gets the capital, yes, but more importantly, it gets that implicit government backing, that stamp of strategic importance. It puts them on a path to potentially rebuild their manufacturing leadership and attract those crucial customers. Long-term stability, renewed relevance.
So it's much deeper than the initial government buys stock, market freaks out headlines.
Much deeper. A strategic play with potentially huge benefits, addressing both national security and, ultimately, Intel's own long-term future.
Fascinating. It really shows you need to look beyond the surface noise sometimes.
Absolutely. These big moves often have layers of strategy that aren't immediately obvious.
Okay, so before we wrap up, any final thought for our listeners to chew on?
Yeah, maybe this. Given everything we've talked about, the complex global supply chains, critical tech, geopolitical tensions, what other vital industries out there might need something similar? Maybe not an equity stake, but some kind of implicit promise or strategic government-private partnership.
Like rare earths, advanced pharma, AI infrastructure.
Could be any number of things.
Yeah.
Where does purely private enterprise need that nudge, that backing to ensure national resilience and long-term stability? Something to think about.
Definitely something to think about. All right, that was a great deep dive.
Glad we could unpack it.